Okay.
Okay.
Okay, you want to know about Grandma Ruby.
Yes. Who was your mother?
Was my mother, Grandma Ruby May.
Ruby May.
And she met Daddy, which would be your great-grandfather, when they were just kids. They lived she lived on Commercial Street and he lived on Bryan, and you go down the alley and you would hit his house on Bryan, and her house, it was on the alley also. And that's when they were kids, and Daddy was interested in Mother, but she wasn't interested in him.
Why not?
Anyhow, I don't know, but Mother just wasn't interested in him. But anyhow, finally she was. And when Daddy was in service, she went to Jamesburg to take care of her cousin who'd had a baby, which wasn't far from Danville, about 8-10 miles maybe to Jamesburg. And they signed the armistice during that time, and Daddy then was over in France. And Marie, her cousin that had the baby, had engaged Mother to come and stay with her for a couple of weeks maybe. Well, but Mother was so excited that she wanted to go home right away because she knew Walter would be coming. And Marie said we couldn't convince her that he would be months before probably he would come. And anyhow, they had to bring her home. Well, it was a year after that before Daddy got home, because then they didn't bring him right home. He had to stay over in France, and he worked in plumbing while he was there in the service. And then after a year, I guess he had said he would probably be coming home soon. So she and her two sisters would walk up often to the railroad depot, which was about 8-10 blocks maybe from their house, and they'd walk up to meet the trains coming in, hoping to see. Well, they went up one night and looked, and they didn't see anybody, and they were ready to turn around, and she saw a soldier, a man in a soldier's uniform, and she said, "Walter," and he turned around, and it was Daddy.
No.
And of course, that was an utter surprise, because she said we were just turning around ready to go back. And so then he was excited, and they all four walked back to Commercial Street. And they were on Main Street, and there was about 8-10 blocks. So that was hilarious. They were just so happy. Well, then when I was born, well, her first babies were twins, and they both died. The one was born and was still living, but the other was stillborn. And after the first one was born, Daddy went, the doctor said, "You can go get the nurse now to stay with Ruby." So he went down the street to tell. Of course, then people didn't have telephones. So he went down to get the nurse to bring him. When they came back, they said, "There's another one." So when I came, he said, "You're not getting me out of this house," after the first one. So from there,
she had the baby. She had all her babies at home.
Yes.
Ruby.
Yes. And then they started building our house on Wayne Street. Grandpa Baumgart built it. And they first had the garage, and they lived in the garage until the house was built. Well, Dolores was born there, and Mother said she always remembered they were having a dance at the park in the pavilion, which they did have two nights a week, Wednesday night and Saturday nights. They had and you'd go over to the pavilion and walk around the circle and listen to the music and so forth. And she said, "I heard him playing 'I'll Be Loving You Always' as Dolores was being born."
Who was that?
Dolores.
Who heard it?
Grandma Ruby was having birth.
Right. And then who heard the music? She could hear it
She
from
could
the
hear
pavilion?
the music while Dolores was being born. I'll be loving you always, da 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 da, always. So whenever I hear that song now, I always think of Mother having Dolores. So that was that, and then they lived in that in the garage until the house was finished. And I don't remember living in the garage, but I was 4 when we moved there.
Mm-hmm.
And anyhow, then we moved in, and then they always rented out the garage because it was like a little house.
Yeah.
And then, what else was I going to tell you about?
What kind of person was your mother?
What?
What kind of person was your mother?
Kind of
What was she like?
Oh, she was fixie. You didn't, when she went to town, she dressed for town. She had, usually she wore gloves, usually wore a hat, because you didn't go downtown as they do now, just dressed anyway. You always got cleaned up to go downtown. And hats, she loved hats. We had the big front porch that we could sit in the swing, and we did much of sitting in the swing. And I remember on a rainy day, Mother would fix bread and butter pickles that she made, and then she'd make sandwiches of the pickles. And we'd sit out on the front porch and eat pickle sandwiches in the swing, and that was it's even now a good thought.
Mm-hmm. What goes on a pickle sandwich?
What?
What goes on a pickle sandwich?
Just pickles.
Just pickles? You don't put butter or mayonnaise or anything?
We had butter, and that's all.
Right.
And she always had an egg lady and a butter lady. And then the man came around in the spring and she bought maple syrup. Mm-hmm. Then at that time too, we had a lot of men that were begging for food, who would get off the railroad, which wasn't, well, it was some distance from our house, but anyhow, they'd come, and she would fix breakfast for them, usually fried eggs, and she'd have them sit on the steps of the back porch, but she never turned anybody down. She always fed them.
And this is during the Depression?
This was during the Depression, yeah, in the late 20s and early 30s. And she visited a lot of people that were in need, and she would take blankets. She had a cousin that was, it was her half-brother, and his family never had anything. And she used to take, I remember, blankets. I'd go with her, and she'd take food to them. And they never had anything growing up. What was that, a squirrel?
It must have been. Landing on the awning.
Yeah. And I saw it fall off.
Oh, you did?
And it was scattered away. So, where was I?
That she used to take blankets to...
Oh, yeah, the blankets and stuff. And one time she was having the wife, or it would be her sister-in-law, was having a baby, and their house was very small, and it was just heated with coal, a stove in the middle of the room. And she and Aggie, you know Aggie Schultz, that was Jimmy's mother. Aggie and Mother were good friends. Went out, and Mother said we scrubbed Alice's feet with lye soap because they were so dirty walking. I don't know if they had floors, maybe just the dirt that was swept clean. Anyhow, they often talked about that time, but his son, he used to paint for Mother, and he would come, and she wanted to fix his lunch. No, he has it in his bucket. and he had 8 o'clock coffee. I remember that so well. And I loved the smell.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't let me have coffee, so I didn't have it. But now 8 o'clock coffee is, I think, up with the high top coffees.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. But I love that. Anyhow, so that was Charles, and Charles and I played together. He was a year older than I, but he'd come with his dad, and Mother encouraged that. Well, anyhow, his sons then kept on with the painting business, and then did industrial painting, and they made a lot of money. And that's good, that you see how they have come up from the bottom, and they probably don't even know that there had ever been a need in their lives. And she'd go to town a couple times a week, and she was busy in missionary work. She had a missionary in a ladies' society, in the Ladies' Aid Society of the church. And I remember well, one snowy morning, she had us for school, and Daddy had us for church. But they didn't have Sunday school at the Lutheran church, so we went to the Presbyterian, which was 4 blocks from us. And it was a snowy morning, and Mother got the sled out and put Dolores and I on the sled and pulled us to the church. Mother was game for anything. She'd try it. And so that was a special morning. I still remember so well getting on that sled, and Mother, it was quiet. We didn't have the noise that we do now.
How old were you?
I probably would have been about 8.
Mm-hmm. So Dolores
she was 4 years younger than I. And anyhow, she pulled us up and back. And then when it came time for me to go to communicants class, then I became a Lutheran. But until then, I was Presbyterian at this little church. And Mother would take the bus, because we didn't have a car. Daddy had the truck. And we would go on, we had the trolley at that time, and we had to go a block up the street to get it, and then we had to get off and come home. Well, then they put the bus route, and they had it the same as the trolley had. And Mother said, I can't see the reason why they would go and come back the same way when they could go around the block and come past our house, and we could pass it right outside the back door. Well, she kept at it until they changed the route, and they came so she was, when she had something on her mind, she kept at it, and so they changed the bus route, and it came around the block and came past our house. And all we had to do was step outside and on the bus. And Saturday nights, then when we had a car, she'd drive up and do shopping. We'd usually eat at Hopkins drugstore or Walgreens. We ate at Walgreens drugstore. Then they had a place called Thompson's, and Mother would almost every Saturday night we did it. Daddy didn't often go with us. He didn't want to go, but Mother, that was fine with her. So we would tromp up there and eat our Saturday night supper, and then we'd park and watch people go by. And she quilted. We often had the quilt pieces, and in our front room, the quilt frame. Oh, I hated that, because there it was all the time. When my friends come, they had to look at that quilt frame with the quilt. But then she'd invite ladies, and they'd come over and work on the quilt. And that's some of the pieces, that she, in my bedroom. And she had pieced all that, but she hadn't put it together when she died.
Dolores put it together, right? And Dolores's group?
Yeah. But I paid for the putting it together.
Yes.
And she was...
That's the quilt that's the Dresden plate, right? That's pink?
Yes. She was a good seamstress. She used to work with a seamstress to make money when she was just out of grade school, I think, that she never went to high school. But Mother was smart. And she didn't waste her time playing bridge or going out to dinner and things like that. She was a homebody. And a good neighbor. She was good friends with a neighbor a couple streets down. Right next door to us, they were good neighbors, and across the street. And she, she worked a lot in the PTA. She was busy in that. And then the things at the church. And then at home, she was always busy, but of course she did the cooking and all the baking, and we always had meals cooked from scratch. Everything was from scratch. And the ice was delivered in chunks that they put in the ice box. And if I was in charge of things, she'd say, now be sure that they cut it long.
What does that mean?
Or they'd cut it, in small, but she said cut it long, so it had to be, so it would fit into the... And then I'd forget to empty the box that the water drained under, and it'd be on the floor. And then finally Daddy made a hole so the water would drain down into the basement. And when the cold came, if I was home, now be sure, Margaret, to tell him to pour the water, to put the hose over the coal so the water will keep down the dust when they put it into the coal room. She was very particular about something. She'd make me get the weeds out of the brick in the summertime. Oh, I hated that. I don't think Dolores had to, but I had to I had to cut the grass. I did that. She made me. And once she made me, when they had the spring house cleaning, she said, now you have to make a meal one night during this time. So I fried pork chops and had bean salad and fried potatoes. That was my menu whenever I had to cook. Daddy wasn't too excited about those meals. But she, as I say, she really cooked. She was a good homemaker. Yep. And we'd have different people. She had her brother living with us who had no work at that time, and he brought his things and put it in our upstairs. And if he came at any time, he'd come up and sleep with us and stay for maybe a couple weeks, and then he'd go out on the road again. And then Mother had Grandpa's mother, Grandma Lena, lived with us, and her dad lived with us. He died, and I remember they didn't take the bodies to funeral homes. They kept them in the homes at that time, and you had the visitation in the home. And Mother didn't want him in a casket at that time. She wanted him on a cot like he was sleeping, which they did. So it was like he had just gone to sleep in the bed. It was a cot, and it was in the front room. And her other brother was divorced, and he had 3 small children, and Flora was the oldest, and she came and lived with us for a while. And she'd have to sleep with Dolores and I, so we'd always put her in the middle because we had to have our parts, and we didn't want her to take ours. So we made poor Flora sleep in the middle. But it seemed like we were always having somebody's. Mother was always giving and doing, and that was Mother. And if people wanted things done, and then one aunt came, and she was married to Daddy's brother, and she said she was going to leave Luz. She couldn't stay there any longer, so she brought one of her boys, and they came down, and she was going to stay there with us for a while, but Uncle Lou kept after her, and she finally went back.
Back to him.
Mother opened up the house, if they wanted to come, well then that was fine with her. So she had kind of an open house, and it was, and I'd bring kids home from nursing school, and we'd 5 or 6 maybe extra. I didn't tell Mother, I'd just take them, and she always provided somehow. Yeah, that was something. So it was lots of, what else? Well, of course, the big hat. She always had to have a big hat. And we spent a lot of time visiting. She had 2 aunts that we called on often, and a brother. I mean, her uncle. Uncle. It would be my great aunts and her uncle and aunts. And
What was her maiden name?
Marble. Her
Marble.
maiden name was Marble.
Ruby May Marble.
And her
Baumgart.
Marble, and her mother's name was, before it was Henderson, was Brown. And these things now I've learned, well, just by asking questions, but I've never been that interested in genealogy. You have to spend a lot of time, and then what is it? What do you have? But if they're interested in that, see, when I have a question, I call Pat down the street, because she has all the genealogy.
How old is Pat now?
Pat is younger than I am. She's probably 10, 15 years younger than I am.
Okay.
But she's worked a lot at it, and her husband died a couple years ago, and she's remarried. She met him there at the library where they have the genealogy. So, let's see now, what else about Mother?
Did she ever get mad at you?
What?
Did she ever get mad at you?
Not too often. No, she didn't.
Was that because she was patient or because you were good?
She was patient, and we had Lodi, which was several miles from us in Indiana in the summertime, and I'd say, Mother, take us to Lodi, and she said, okay. So we'd pile in the car, and she'd fix a lunch, and we'd go over. And then in the summertime, when spring began to get nice weather, she would fix a little lunch, and we'd cross the street and have lunch under a catalpa tree. There was a string of catalpa trees, and she put a blanket down, and we sat and had our lunch across the street from the house. We had many picnics. And anyhow, she'd get in the car, and I'd take several friends, and we'd go down to Lodi and spend the day.
What was special about Lodi?
They had a pool.
Okay.
But it was filled with artesian well water, and it had an odor, sulfur water. But after you were there a while, you didn't notice the odor, but you did when you first go there. Well, everybody kind of shunned it, except a few of us. One day we took Murph. That would have been, I would have been a junior. But she was always in for things. You could always count on Mother, and if anybody needed things done at school, I'd Mother, my mother will do it. And she did.
Did she like Grandpa?
Was she like Grandpa?
Did she like him? Did she like Glenn?
Oh, yeah, she did. But she'd get a little unhappy with him, too.
Why?
Because she thought he wasn't very nice to me. And one time he came and rummaged around in the icebox, which was really an icebox, and ate a banana that Mother, we never ate bananas because she got those for Daddy's lunch. We couldn't afford, she couldn't afford to get enough to feed us. Well, he ate Daddy's banana. That's when she was really mad at her. She said, that kid So, yeah, she was a little unhappy about that.